Well, I trust you're ready for another study in spiritual warfare, and I trust you've been listening to the previous broadcasts, because that will help you better to understand what we are saying today. Now, if you want a detailed study of the subject of spiritual warfare and deliverance and the problems of occult participation and how to be liberated from oppression, that's available, as we've told you, in my book entitled Angels of Light and Every Wind of Doctrine, as well as many tapes on our book and tape list that deal with deliverance and spiritual warfare. You can send for this because the address is given at the close of each broadcast. We were dealing last time with how to recognize the subtle changes in behavior as the manifestation of multiple personalities. Now, most people, including most psychiatrists, just do not know how to cope with odd behavior that seems to come and go. We called it the chameleon syndrome, where certain things will trigger personality changes in a person. Certain things will trigger this, and it will recur over a period of time, over the years. And if you are disciplined in deliverance and how to recognize some of these things, then you will see what you're dealing with in a wife or a husband or a friend or a child is a multiple personality that somehow has entered this person. It may be a spirit of selfishness or desire for attention or of rebellion or a spirit of torment or whatever. Now today we come to another manifestation of the chameleon syndrome, that is, the person that changes behavior back and forth, and most people are unable to recognize, unable to see that this is the manifestation of a spirit. They just think it's odd behavior that comes and goes, is religious behavior that causes a person to act differently in religious situations from what he normally would do. Here's another case I've dealt with where I saw the manifestation of two personalities. One was outgoing, an extrovert. He was a leader when he was among his peers. He was in charge. Now, I mean, he really was loud and he took charge. But the second personality would manifest when he'd be in my presence, or any adult for that matter, and there would be no eye contact. He would be withdrawn. He would mumble his words. You couldn't hear what he was saying. And finally one day I said, why do you trail off? You will start to where you will say something like, well, the reason I did, and he just trails off that way until you couldn't understand a word he was saying. I said, why do you do that? Well, he said, I've got two voices. You see, a discerning person right away has been given a clue that there's a multiple personality manifesting in this person, in this individual. He said, I've got two voices. One is when I speak to friends my age, my peers, and that was the dominating one. And then the other voice, he says, comes when I speak to someone like you, an adult or a teacher or a pastor, someone I respect. Well, I began to note there were three kinds of behavior being manifested in this young man, and that the third voice I was hearing was religious. That is to say, this third personality of the multiple personalities in him manifested when he, for example, was involved in some sort of religious context or worship, or if he gave his testimony before the church, he would affect a religious tone that was an exact duplicate of a man who had spoken in our church a couple of times, an old order Amish person who had been saved and baptized in the Holy Spirit. And this young man of whom I'm speaking thought this was a pious sound. The man had a very sing-songy, religious, pious sort of tone or voice, and he would affect this religious tone whenever he was talking, especially if he was giving a testimony. And then sometimes he would suddenly stare toward heaven and raise his arms like he was having a vision, a real wild stare though, and we just have to talk around him because he was lost. He was off in limbo somewhere. And then if I would minister charismatically, supernaturally, through prophecy and the laying on of hands, well, he would jump up and try to minister too, and that sort of thing. And he had real strange beliefs, religious beliefs, like men should never show their arm above the wrist, they should always wear long sleeves, and women should wear gray cotton hose under long dresses. Well, of course, the only way that you could satisfy his requirements not to show anything at all would be to wear a long-sleeve jumpsuit and a motorcycle rider's helmet and wear gloves. And then everyone else in the church got the Holy Spirit after I went to Chicago back in 1966 at a full gospel businessmen's meeting, heard a testimony, and received the baptism of the Holy Spirit and came back and told the church about it. Well, in a matter of a few days, the whole church had received, but we noticed he would always withdraw himself and hang back and never came for the baptism. And then later he left the church and came back to see me once and said, well, I already had it. I got it years ago. Why, he had not so much as heard of the baptism of the Holy Spirit any more than the rest of we Baptists had. But you see, that was that spirit, that religious spirit that would manifest. Now, most just thought this young man had odd behavior occasionally, and I could tell you some things that would really make you smile. But these were multiple personalities manifesting through him. And then another category of the multiple personality manifestation is what I call the family in residence. Sometimes several spirit personalities are embedded in the human personality. Up to this time in these broadcasts, we've been talking about another personality that manifests when a person feels threatened. Then the spirit will take over. They'll give into that spirit, or 2 or 3 different personalities. But now I'm speaking of the family in residence. There's a whole family of spirits, demons as it were, in this individual. Sometimes several spirit personalities are embedded in the human personality, each struggling for control or manifestation. I mean, like 20, 25, 50, 100. You remember the legion that Jesus dealt with in Mark chapter 5. There were 2,000 swine into which they went, and you remember when Jesus casts them out of the demoniac, that the 2,000 swine ran over the precipice and drowned in the sea. So there were many, many spirits in him, and sometimes we've encountered this ourselves, and we know of cases where over 100 will come out naming themselves. So conditions have to be right for certain ones to appear or talk through their victim or manifest some odd behavior. The doorkeeper, as we've told you before, is in charge. And these spirits are like lions lying at the door waiting to manifest themselves. And so certain things will trigger this, as we've said previously, like alcohol and drugs can release one of these spirits from being dormant to full control at certain times, and it will manifest itself as a spirit of rage or a spirit of religion. People who take drugs often manifest real pious or odd religious behavior, or they get off into the cults and Eastern religions and so forth. These are spirits that are released through their taking the drugs or being alcoholics. Then lustful thoughts or viewing or reading can release a spirit of fornication, adultery, self-abuse, rape, and so on. Or when there's threat or fright, or when a person's rights are challenged. Sometimes spirits that have been lying within, spirits of retaliation and rage or hate or violence or resentment will manifest. Now, some of these spirits are quite deep-rooted demons or spirits, say of enmity or resentment or hate against a parent or a wife or a husband. Due to some earlier hurt, they're lying dormant down in the spirit or the life of the person, and something will trigger that will cause a spirit of resentment or retaliation or punishment or torment to take over. And you'll see it manifested sometimes as the person will ruin a long-planned vacation because they'll give into this spirit because of a previous hurt, because their feelings were hurt or the husband or wife mistreated them. Then they get back at them at certain times when they know they can torment them or hurt them. But because it's one of the multiple personalities deeply embedded within the human personality, this demon remains to most undetected. But you will note it seems to occur again and again. That's one of the clues we gave you, And always when you believe that that's the last you'll ever see of that unpleasant experience because you didn't know it was a spirit manifesting, you talk to the person about it and they pray about it and they give it up. They say, well, I won't do that again, or they're counseled and prayed for, and yet you notice it does happen again and again, and you can't understand why. You thought, that had already been dealt with. But it's always in connection with some event that can ruin things for both the persons. I mean, it's a spirit of torment where the person loves to torment others and torment themselves. However, some of these other selves, if you can call them that, they're really spirits, they lie dormant for years and never surface, except when the doorkeeper allows them to occasionally, except when something triggers that. And they're hard to detect since you only have the outward behavior to go by, and this is what will give them away. And if that spirit doesn't manifest, it may lie dormant for years and you don't know it's there. In one deliverance session, for example, I'm acquainted with this deliverance minister. He cast out 19 demons out of this woman, and one of them manifested as a lesbian spirit. Why, he said, she isn't lesbian. Why are you saying you're a lesbian demon of lust? And the spirit answered, she doesn't know I'm here. I've never manifested myself in her life yet. She doesn't know I'm inside. And then in another case, a woman told me personally that she had fear so bad that strangers would stop and ask what was wrong. It was written all over her face and her actions. And one day some charismatic friends asked to pray for her, that she needed deliverance from a spirit of fear. Well, she knew she had fear of everything, but did not think of it in terms of a demon. And so she let them pray and then went on to bed. And she said to me at 2 o'clock I had to get up because I was sick. I had to go to the bathroom and retch. And when I did, she said, demons began to come out as I would vomit them out and name themselves, fear and pride. And she said there were things in me that came out that I never dreamed were inside me as spirits, as demons. And so some of these other selves lie dormant for years before they surface. What is the cure for the multiple personality syndrome? Well, 2 things. First of all, the person must be willing, like the alcoholic, to admit that he or she has the problem, and then that person must want with all their heart to give that up to be delivered. Now, these 2 things are essential, because these spirits, which we can call multiple personalities, are too closely identified with the individual. They have become almost a part of that individual's own personality, and they're so much a part of their behavior and the way they act and think, it would be like cutting off an arm to get rid of the spirit, getting a divorce, or bidding goodbye forever to some old friend. And so it's not enough merely to want to be set free of some problem. It's not merely enough to try to change your behavior. It's not merely enough to go for deliverance. No, the person has to be willing to admit that these are personal manifestations of multiple personalities in the life that causes this change in behavior, this odd behavior that comes and goes over a period of years, and the person has to want this deliverance and to give up these old friends, as it were, with all of his heart, or this person will never be set free, because these spirits, these multiple personalities, are too much a part of the individual's personality. Send for the book and tape list and get these tapes and books we mentioned.